Thank you for being here for the last session of the day. It's my pleasure to introduce Cristian Lopez, who's going to talk about relational primitivism, about the direction. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you very much, Cristian and Damiano, for organizing this conference. I think it's a huge work, and so far everything is great. Okay, let me talk about this. About this idea. This is something that we were working with Michael Esfeld 2 years ago, roughly. Yeah, some idea that we try to mix some philosophy of physics and some metaphysics of science, and some of this view that is trying to get minimal metaphysics to explain some phenomena. So this is one of the view that we are right at, is relational view about the direction of time, which is one of the approach that we can take to talk about the direction of time in a minimal metaphysics. So you know that when talking about the direction of time, many people think immediately of thermodynamics, or this whole discussion about where you have to reduce thermodynamics to classical mechanics, or you think of, I know, decays in weak interactions, and all of the problem reduced to that. But we took a step back and started from a more fundamental question that I think that is really the problem in the direction of time. When you see it from a more metaphysical setting, is to decide whether the arrow of time or direction of time is primitive or derived, right? When you think of the direction of time in terms of thermodynamics, you already have a reply to this question. You already think the direction of time is reduced to entropy increasing processes, or whatever. You can tell a story about that. But you already think that there is this reduction. So we see, okay, let's think this is true, and we were kind of, sympathetic with the primitive view. But the first concern about the primitive view is that, well, you have this very, very strong argument in philosophy of physics about time reversal invariant law, which in some sense is saying that if you postulate as primitive a direction of time, then this is in contradiction with having time reversal invariant laws, because the direction of time would be superfluous or redundant, and you can just get rid of it. So in some sense, if you are a primitivist, you are told, okay, this view is not so much empirically adequate. Again, because invariant. The second concern in this framework of minimal metaphysics, again, is, well, it seems that if you adore something like a primitive direction of time, then you are committed to temporal substantivalism. And it doesn't seem so parsimonious or so simple. So you have to overload your ontology. If you want a direction of time, you also need to have something like a substantivalism, which, again, for some could be not an issue, could be quite okay, and maybe could be very good arguments to take this path. But again, in this framework of having the most minimal metaphysics that you can have, well, this could be a problem. So this is what we start to think. You know, this Francis Bacon have this idea that any theory should have 2 steps. The first step is a parse destruens, the idea that, okay, remove all the prejudice and trying to destroy the previously held belief about something. Well, in this case, we say, okay, probably this argument about time reversal invariant must be deflated. Probably it's not so important to the discussion about the direction of time. And this is a way to clean the way for a primitive view, in the sense that, well, probably what people are saying about time reversal invariant is not so important for this. And the second part is the parse construens, when you build up your view about time after removing all these prejudices. So this is the more Leibnizian relational view that we were defending. So basically, this is our proposal, is to think that there is a direction of time. The direction of time must be primitive, and I'm going to explain why I think that this should be primitive. Time reversal invariance is not really a problem for this approach or for any other primitive approach. It is much more general, because actually it's not really something talking about where it's fundamental, or about is the ontology made of. It's about more epistemic virtue in physical theories. So we mix kind of these 2 views. I mean, there's no necessity to mix these two views, but it's one way in which you can find path to be primitive about direction of time, but also to deal with the autonomy of time person invariant, and also to be more parsimony if you have any interest on that. So we have this human view on the side, right? This is a way in which we say, okay, if you are a human about laws, you have probably a good argument to say that universal invariance is not very important. And then if you want to keep your ontology parsimonious and you think of time in the Leibnizian way, well, probably putting these two things together, you have a case for what I got here, relational primitive. So, parse the strength. Why these time reversal arguments might be replaced? There are many ways to formulate this argument. I mean, this is just one way, but I mean you can find different ways. The first premise is just an assumption that, well, if you have dynamic laws that are time reversal invariant, then primitive direction of time is metaphysically unnecessary. Then you have a premise about parsimony, which is a positive unnecessary structure. It happens that brackets most dynamical laws are time reversal invariant. This is an in principle empirical premise. Or some people think that's an empirical premise. Then a primitive direction of time is then necessary, and we should be positive primitive. Again, there are many ways to post the argument, but this is one way. Also, you can look at the premises and say many things. I mean, I think all of them are open to criticism. I mean, you can say premise 3 is false. It's not true that all dynamical laws are 100% invariant. And you put your finger on weak interaction, say no, you have a clear case that it's not 100% invariant. Well, okay, this is one way to go. Also, you can say, well, the idea of time reversal is not very well defined. I mean, you can have cases of underdetermination of how you should reverse time in some particular theory. Some people are arguing in that line. Again, there are many ways to dismantle this argument. What I'm going to do is to focus on this particular premise. This is the premise 1, in which you are assuming that from time reversal invariant laws, you can draw a metaphysical conclusion about the world. Right? And that this is a crucial premise in the argument, and I'm going to try to argue that, well, there are conditions in which you cannot do that, or you shouldn't do that. So basically, what is going on in this premise, I think? You have this view that it was very popular in the last decades about, well, you have symmetries in your physical theories, and then you can deduce something about the space-temporal structure, or about the fundamental interactions, or whatever you want. So there seems to be this inference from symmetries to reality. Time reversal invariant arguments are a way to instantiate this inference. You have time reversal symmetry on one side, and then you say something about the temporal structure on the other, that there is no direction of time as primitive. This is very common. Fine, but my question was that, well, why is this inference justified? I mean, why we should buy this argument? As well, would you have something symmetry, something that belongs to the mathematical structure of the physical theories, show that some dynamical equation are invariant under some transformation, and you prove it. But why should now say something about that implies something about the world? I mean, and all the conditions of why we are justified to this. I'm not going to talk about the different justification. In these two papers, I have argued that under some conditions, this inference can be justified. But you have to buy the condition first, and you have for reason to not buy the condition. Conditions about idealizations, about how you circumscribe your domain application, also which things you consider more fundamental, because you have some more general laws, some more laws with interactions, and then you have some debate about this. So, but under some assumptions could be justified, but under other assumptions, in this paper are arguing why you should not take so seriously these assumptions could be not justified. But what I want to say here is that one way in which we can resist this argument is to take this side, the side of symmetries, not as telling us something about the world, but telling us something about how to formulate the physical theories. That's why I think I talk about here giving a more epistemic or even a normative reading of symmetries. So symmetries are not really describing what the world is like. We're not saying that the world is time symmetric. We are saying that the formulation that we give about some regularities in the world are time symmetric. So this is one way in which now, if we take this view, if we say, okay, now we are shifting this focus. We are now thinking of symmetries or in epistemic terms as properties of physical theories. Well, this is a way in which now the argument about time represent now looks weaker in the sense that why we should take semi-virtual physical theories so metaphysically seriously. And this again is a suggestion to say that if, as we said before, it's mainly an ontological problem about whether it's primitive or it's derivative, which place it has in your ontology. Now, these epistemic virtues like time versus symmetry seems to be so important to take this decision about the direction of time in the ontology. This is quite general. I mean, it doesn't really imply some particular position that you should have about laws, about your fundamental ontology. You can talk about this more epistemic normative view of symmetries in different frameworks. But one way is to go human, to say, okay, I'm going to assume something like the human framework about laws, and I'm going to think of symmetries in these terms. And in this paper, also with Michael Esfeld, what we argue is that if you go human, you say, okay, I believe that laws supervene upon regularities, and also they have some epistemic constraints because they should foster simplicity and informativeness, all these stories that you already probably know. Well, I can interpret physical symmetries as something that you impose on the physical theories to make your best system really, really good system, right? And because again, you want generalizations that perform very well in simplicity, unification, informativeness, and one way to do this is to impose some symmetries. So this is one way in which humans could think of symmetries as epistemic virtues, not really describing whatever is going on in the human mosaic. The human mosaic is about ontology, whatever is going on there is a matter of ontology. Now we have this description about regularities in ontology, all this proposition about generalizations, but also we have all this story about epistemic constraints, and symmetry seems to be very important to really boost these epistemic constraints. So in this paper also I mean, we try to make clear that, again, as I said at the beginning, whether the direction of time is primitive or not is an ontological issue. It's something that depends on physics and ontology. It's why you think that it should be primitive. Then you need to need a story to say, okay, it's primitive because I want to explain some things. Or if you think that it should be reduced to something else, then you need to show how it can be reduced. So this is an ontological debate. But again, if you take this more epistemic normative view of symmetries, it's a bit more clear that whether physical theory is time represent or not is not an ontological problem. It's more a problem about how to formulate right physical theories, or physical theories that are best than other physical theories. So it's like what I got here a representational issue. Is something about formulation of your laws, formulation of your general principles about describing the regularities, but it's not really about, or it's not easy to see that they are about the ontology. And this is the lemma, if you want, that issues of ontology, direction of time, shouldn't be conflated with issues of representation, whether you can formulate your theories in a time representative way. This is a different problem, about your skills about formulating good physical theories, but it's not really about ontology. So, I mean, I didn't give any argument in favor of this view, and like that you have to read the other things. But what I'm trying to say is that it's not so obvious that this argument the time reversal argument works as before, in the sense that there are other premises and there are alternative readings, in particular of this first premise, that, well, if you really want the argument to go through, you want to be more explicit about these other commitments. And you can reject it, and then you can take a different view, like this epistemic normative view of symmetries. And if you take the view, then this argument it doesn't work anymore. Or at least it's not so compelling about this jump from symmetry to reality. So this is one way in which both that you want to be primitive about the relation of time, and someone said, okay, look, you have time reversal invariant laws, and this argument seems to be very strong against primitivism. And this reply is saying something like, well, yes, but why you think that symmetries are informative about the ontology, because symmetries could be thought of as semi-normative theory. Right? This is one way. As I said before, there are other ways to dismantle the argument, and other are more based on physical case. Again, for instance, about this underdetermination of the time reversal transformation in mechanical theories, because sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not obvious, and sometimes you have some debate about whether it's the right way to implement time reversal. But this is one way to deflate the beginning of time reversal, saying, okay, probably it's not that important because it's a program of how to formulate physical theories in a more effective way. So this is what the parsers was a part of the parsers. Now, having seen the path in says that time reversal probably is not so important, let me go to the positive views and try to build to convince in some way that you can be also a relational primitivist about the direction of time. Again, this is the question. You need to think about whether the direction of time is primitive or derivative. I said it's a metaphysical ontological question. And this is the thesis that we were thinking in this, again, minimal metaphysics and relational framework is, well, time is primitive directed because we impose that change is also primitive. Then I'm going to explain why. But before going to that, in other cases, it's not very clear why you are primitive about something. And you would say that you should be primitive about something. I mean, your theory is starting from somewhere. And you have to take your metaphysical decision about whether you start from here or you start from there. So in this case, because you want to explain something. And this is a metaphysical decision that you have to take at some point. Okay, these are my primitive things. And then I'm going to tell a story about how the rest of the things can be reduced or emerge or supervene upon these basic things. But you have to take something as primitive. Now the debate is not whether to take something as primitive, it's to take which kind of things should be primitive and which kind of things shouldn't be. So something must be primitive. This is the question. We can discuss about it, but I think it's out of question. And why we take something primitive, again, it depends on the explanatory role. We want the primitive to be as explanatory as possible, because we want to explain real things, and then we can reduce these real things, these things that we see every day, to the primitives. So you're going to choose your primitive because, or mainly because the explanatory role. So when we say that change is primitive, we are taking metaphysical decision, but which kind of things or which kind of primitive we think that is going to play a very important explanatory role in the rest of the physical explanation, but also in the daily explanation about general. So we don't need to explain change. We say change is our starting point. We impose change in ontology because we think that it's going to explain more things. So it cannot be reduced to or explained by anything else. And in this case, we're not thinking that you have change and then you can explain change in terms of something else. For instance, say, okay, we have change because something in the physical world is going on because I don't know entropy goes in one direction or because something in with interactions. No, it's the other way. We impose change because we want to explain why these things behave in that way. Why entropy increase and why we have these weak interactions decays, blah blah. Okay, we impose change at this. It's a way to explain the asymmetries. Well, I mean, the justification, as before, is that physical theories and explanation more generally need postulate change to be effective. And then I'm going to say that you could argue against that view, and I'm going to say what you want. Okay, this is why primitive. Why it's just again a metaphysical decision about your ontology and what you think that should be primitive, and why you think that that thing should be primitive. Now, why relational? What we mean here by relational is mainly that we are thinking of a monist ontology in the sense that you don't have different kind of substances. You only have matter and relation, but relation are not the different substances, just relation. What you really have is just matter. It's just the old Leibnizian view about the ontology. So we have this monist view, matter plus relations, and these relations are also primitive event-to-event relations. About the space and time, we have this more ideal view that they are just abstraction that you take from spatial and temporal relations, right? And they are not substances by themselves, but they are just keeping track of the relations and the temporal relations that you have in ontology, which again are primitive. As again, spatial relations are primitive because you have things, immediately you have a spatial relation, right? They are just kind of reduced to something else.
So just to clarify, so here event is matter.
Yeah, it could be something going on in some location. Yeah, could be the matter to matter relations. Because I was thinking more in time. Time you have some event, other event, and kind of reduce this to instant to instant.
So matter is an event is matter.
No, here I'm thinking about time. You can also make the same case for spatial relation and talk to matter relations.
Okay,
right?
matter to matter.
Yeah, here, yeah, if it was a sloppy, I'm probably should put something more complete. Something better. Yeah, but again, when you have spatial relations, enter the ontology as primitive. This is what in Leibnizian terms give you the order of coexistence, right? Some things that coexist and they are glued together by spatial relations. But this spatial relation again depends on having things. It just enter automatically in ontology because you have things. And anything about space is identical to the thing about spatial relation, right? And this is the main word-making relation. Okay, but now you have some complete view about things, right? It's, you have stuff, and then you have immediately these spatial relations, and then you have a word, which is word-making relation. But also then is the imposition that we do that is also this ontology change. But if we are saying that this ontology change, enter the ontology as primitive is something that we are imposing. We cannot reduce this because the only thing we have is matter and spatial relations. This cannot be reduced to this. So we need to impose a new relation that is a temporal relation. So we impose that things also change. I'm going to think more about this in brief. But the relational point is that any statement about time, direction of time, or whatever you're talking about time, is going to be identical to a statement about the change in the ontology. So at the end, any statement about time is going to be identical to whatever you have to say about temporal relations. Again, we can discuss about this. It's because it's not always that the relational view is the true view, right? But this is the starting point, and also I think that it's not very complicated to adapt all this discourse to a more standard view. But the hard case is to make it the relational view, in which it's less clear that you could have a direction of time. But in this case, it's what we are doing is just showed that we need spatial relations to make a world, to have this ontology because they are primitive, don't matter, and then impose that you need new relations because the things change, and you want it to change to explain other things. That's why it's appearing. What is special about change? And I have this quote by Leibniz. Because at some point you say, okay, fine, you have this relational ontology, we have things, matter, we have spatial relations, there are world-making relations, and now you are saying that these things change, and then we need a new relations, where you're calling temporal relations, but what's the difference between these two relations, right? We put this spatial and temporal relation. But again, this again a metaphysical decision, but in this letter, there is some clue about this. I admit, however, that there's this difference between instance and points. And by instance, it's referring just to time and space. One point of the universe has no advantage of priority over another, while a preceding instant always has the advantage of priority to not merely in time, but in nature of the following instant. So, this is our argument in taking this Leibnizian inspiration. We postulate that the ontology change, and that's what they change is primitive. That ontology change means that there's a new kind of relation. We need a new formative relation to make this change in Europe. And these are temporal relations, which are different from a spatial relation. But why are they different? And then we take this Leibniz insight and say, well, one way to distinguish between them is to say, well, because these relations are always directed. They are primitive directed. As soon as you have temporal relations, you also have some direction. Otherwise, they would collapse into a spatial relation. So this is again more when you impose changes, apparently you are imposing temporal relations, but also with them they have an inbuilt, if you want, directionality. And then we say that the direction of time is identical. I mean, anything you have to say about time is going to be identical to change, and then change is, in this case, primitively directed. So direction of time is also primitively directed. So this is basically what put it just in a more ideal way. We say, okay, when you have this order of coexistence in this Leibnizian terminology, we have what someone could call a maximal configuration, right? Some entities, you can postulate that these things have some properties, but also these red lines are just, they are spatially separated. Because we have many things, this enters ontology immediately, automatically. And this order of coexistence could display some variation. There's more things on one side, less things on the other. This relation could be asymmetric, whatever you want. But it's clear that this is what in the Leibnizian terminology mean by the order of coexistence. Right? It's something like this kind of thing. Of course, you can think of a different maximal configuration. You can say, okay, now you give me this picture, but I can think that everything is just moving, is concentrated in one corner, or everything is distributed in a different way. It's of course true. You can have different maximal configurations, matter, with different spatial relations. One way to think of that is, okay, they have a modal difference. Possible ways in which distant relations or basic entities properties could be different. This is absolutely conceivable, and then you define different maximal configurations of matter with different sort of relations in the way that they could be distributed differently or with different kind of properties, wherever you want, and you're going to index each of these maximal configurations with different words, right? To say, okay, this is the actual word, this represents things, how they are distributed in this world, but could be different. Yeah, it could be different, and this is some modal relation, if you want. But things could be different also in a different way. You can think that there is no a modal connection between these two maximal configurations. These are temporal connections. Some things, some configuration change in some way that becomes different configuration. and you want to talk about things, about this kind of situation in a different way. You don't want to say that it's just a possible way. You have to say, no, these things change from this distribution to a different distribution. And that's why we need a new relation that makes this connection clear. And this is what recover the Leibniz idea of we want an order of succession, right? We need that one thing to come first, and then it's related to a different thing that comes after, and the relation between these two things is a different new kind of relation, which is temporal. Again, why temporal? Because we impose as temporal, and we want to distinguish from a spatial relation, but also now from modal relation. Yeah, we need to account for this relation. Need these relations because the other relations that we already have in ontology are not enough. And we are just moving because we want to explain new things. For some things change, then we need to overload, if you want, the ontology, or load the ontology with a new relations with this temporal. And again, this now is this new kind of relation. It's a new formative relation, but because it's making a changing matter configuration. So because we went talk about things like this, all right? I mean, we have some configuration, and then we say, okay, now this first piece we index to some time, it's just arbitrary and conventional, and then we want to talk about situations in which that configuration changes, and then we impose new relations. And this is what we define by that change in maximal configuration of matter. It's basically that. But what should be clear is that why we are doing this, why we are imposing new kind of relations, why we are saying that there should be a new world-maker relation. It is that we want to talk and explain situation in which we believe that things are connected in a special way, not only modally, not only spatially, but something that is changed. And the ontology should reflect this in synthesis. So, well, okay, yeah, temporal relations, I said, because you are imposing change, you are also imposing new kind of relation, temporal relations, they are primitive in this sense. And then you need to distinguish, as before, these two relations, and one way to distinguish them is to make, okay, one of them is directed, because it's what recover most of our intuition and explanation about the connection between different configuration of things. We are thinking that things change in one direction, not in both directions. And then we can discuss what that means exactly to change in one direction, how we go. So the direction of time enter as primitive as the direction of change because we need to draw this distinction. So, okay, this is roughly in which way you can recover a primitive view about the direction of time in a relational frame. You have to associate time with change, then both change is primitive, and then the direction of time follows from this idea. And then it's the direction of time in this particular sense which explain the rest of the asymmetries that you can see. It's not the other way. It's not that you explain direction of time by entropy increasing processes. It's the other way because you have something like change, which is primitively directed, that you can explain entropy increasing behavior. So you are inverting the usual way to explain this kind of things, but it's because you are a primitivist about the direction of time. This particular way to do it is the traditional way, but if you are primitivist in any way, you want that to be very explanatory, also explanatory of the other asymmetries. So, okay, now, of course, there are many ways to resist the argument. I'm not saying that it's a knockdown argument. But one way is probably the obvious way is to say, okay, why do you think that there is a fundamental distinction between what I call variational spatial variation in change? Probably fundamentally all we have are spatial relations. We don't have anything like time. We don't have even in this very weak sense. Okay, this is an argument, but this amounts to denying that change is primitive. You want to explain change by reducing change to something else. Now, at least something else should be timeless in some way or changeless in some way. Okay, this is proposing at least fundamentally some frozen ontology. And then we can have a discussion about in which sense is still physics. And this is more a normative question, right? I mean, in general, I get the view that physicists want to think about things like change and are in space. Actually, because we want to explain things are in space and time. Now, if you propose a physical theory that says, okay, there is no time whatsoever, or everything is from space, you say, well, let's have a discussion about when you think that this is still physics and not something. Okay, this is not a very good argument, but it's one way in which I think that. But more importantly, I think that I would take care that we are not losing too much explanatory power. Again, what we want by imposing change in this case and imposing a direction of time as primitivist because it's getting too much, it's getting us too much explanatory power. And we want to explain many phenomena that are asymmetric in time. And that's why we are postulating the direction of time because this make a good case for explaining these kind of things. And now what you say, okay, now we have to explain what you have to change from something that doesn't change in extent. And then you have to, to tell a story about how this can be the case. And not many of these stories are completely convincing. How you obtain something like change from something that doesn't change. Okay, we can discuss this, but something that's getting too complicated these days. Yeah. Okay, this is one way in which you can say, okay, there's no really a distinction. What do you want this? Well, the other objection could be, okay, I can buy that there's a distinction between spatial and temporal relations. This okay, but what do you think that is about directionality? Probably there's something else. There's no that time is directed, and that's a difference with temporal relation, with the spatial relation. Probably there's something other feature that is making this distinction. Well, this could be a available option, but the burden of proof is on the other side. I mean, you have to say which is the other property that distinguishes these two relations. And now, again, you have the same problem as before that tell a convincing story how directionless temporal relations gain directionality from some other property. And well, I would like to hear this in how you obtain one or the other. And more generally, maybe more provocatively, it's really directionless time still time? Well, probably it's not. Probably it's something essential to time have a direction. Again, this could be possible ways. I'm not saying that it's not an argument to make this clear, but I accept that this could be open flanks to his view. Yeah. So conclusions. Basically, I'm going to just sum up what I already said. Is we start assuming that the problem of direction of time is not about thermodynamics, it's not about with interactions, it's not about what's going on in physical theories. It's more about taking the metaphysical decision whether they're primitive or not. And then, of course, you want to explain what's going on in physics, but this is a previous discussion. You want to make your metaphysical decision of which way you want to go. In this way, as I said before, if you want to be a primitivist, you have some arguments and some concerns about overloading your ontology or dealing with these time reversal arguments. So we want to find our way through these arguments and say two things. Maybe what I said at the beginning is the main argument against primitive view, time reversal moral laws. Well, I think must be deflated. It's an argument that depends on more things that it's usually thought. And these other things sometimes are a bit complicated. One way to instantiate this deflation is to go human and say, okay, tell me a story about regularities and about the best systems and all this stuff. And this is a way to deflate. So now if you deflate this way, so the argument loses some perceptive form, and it's not always perceptive form, at least for the metaphysical equation that I want to reply in the first place. And the second part is what I call here the parts of sense, is try to formulate how a relational ontology could still have a primitive direction of time, in terms of a primitive direction of change, but without committed, of course, without substantivalism. So in this way, and this is what Michael's love is to say this parsimony view. Yeah, so this is basically the story that I want to tell. So, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. That was really interesting. So my question is, now when you rejected the first premise of the time reversal, the TRI argument, and then you said things like scientific theories are occupied with presentation of the ontology, TRI should be construed as an epistemic virtue, as a heuristic. You use all these words. Now, all of this gives me a very heavy vibe of scientific anti-realism. Not saying that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
I love scientific anti-realism. So would you agree? So my question is, can you be a committed scientific realist and still reject first premise, or do you have to fear some kind of anti-realism to do that?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and you asked same question to me many times. First, let's frame the situation. No realist think that everything in the theory plays a recognition role. So you are anti-realist of something always. So first, so you need to be a complete anti-realist to follow this argument. No, you need to be anti-realist about the symmetries, but you can be realist about other things. In this particular case, if I mean anti-realist about the symmetries, in some sense, yes, because I am putting them in a more plain, again, a more normative approach about how to feel good physical theories. So in that sense, I'm not giving them some referential role in the physical theory. They are not really representing things, they are not really representing what is going on in the world, they are just doing different work. So in that case, I am anti-realist about the symmetries, but that doesn't imply that I'm anti-realist about everything else in the theory. I would still have some.
There are many follow-ups.
Sure.
Yeah, so I just want to ask, I don't understand this at all. The reason I reject that argument is that I'm a realist about the observed asymmetries. I mean, you have down there, well, most of them are time reversal invariant. We could go into a big deal about that. CP is violated.
Yeah, it's just one way. Yeah.
I'm a realist about that. That tells me time's not symmetric.
Yeah, there's one way in which you can reject the argument.
I just don't understand why anybody who takes the physics seriously would think this is a good argument. The physics on its own is telling us the opposite.
Yeah, I fully agree with you.
Okay.
But I don't hold this argument. I'm telling you,
Yeah.
this is the argument that you find many times. This is an common argument, and I did my best to reconstruct it. And you can say, of course, it's not true because premise 3 is false.
Right.
And you say that, yeah, this is one way. Or you can say something about the way in which you implement the universal invariance, and this is what I said sometimes. Now I'm attacking this first premise.
Yeah.
You need to attack this first premise. No, you can attack different premises, and yeah, I mean, I agree that this is
the direction of the response is the opposite. You're not becoming sort of anti-realist about something. It's like you're being really about something.
Yeah, it's very good. I got you. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, my question is similar, but maybe I'll push it slightly differently, because somebody who's really a defender of the idea that the, say, entropic direction is, observable, it's something we think our science should reflect, it's the fact about what's happening. They'll typically say something like, you need an initial boundary condition that is very low entropy.
Yeah.
And without that, you won't get it, because in the sense that like at the level of Newtonian physics that's relevant for entropy, it is time reversal symmetric. So you say, oh, well, look, we'll throw in this time arrow fundamentally with the relations. And look, we'll get all the other ones out. And you might get the physics, like the CPT arrow back, or the weak interaction back, but it's unclear to me how you'd get entropy from the direction of entropy from that without also needing the boundary condition.
Mhm.
And so maybe you also think there is the boundary condition. And if so, like, how does that relate to the direction of time? Is it just an accident that happens to be at the right end of time for us, or is that?
Yeah, I get your point. Yeah, I would say the following. Usually, what many people do is, I want to explain the direction of time that we see everywhere, and then you reduce it to the entropy increasing behaviors. But yet you have this problem with the Newtonian mechanics being time reversal invariant, and you say, okay, I need to impose an initial path hypothesis or something like that, and then I can reveal all the explanation. And probably this is a good way to go if you assume that the direction of time can be reduced to these things. And now I can just push further, okay, what do you call it, the path hypothesis, because the time reversal invariant laws could be the future hypothesis, and you have this double standard fallacy, all this kind of discussion. What I'm doing here is forget about this reduction. You need something like a direction of time to explain why things increase in some direction, because increase is already a temporal notion. So I need to assume that there is a direction of time. Now, in this case, it's about temporal relation and change, to explain what I mean by saying something like something increases. What I mean by increases if you don't have already some temporal notion in your mind before. And then you can have this story about the boundary condition, but this explains something much more specific. It's explain about how you recover entropy in thermodynamics from classical statistical mechanics. This is one discussion, and I don't have any problem with that. It could be a good explanation, but you don't need the boundary conditions to talk about the direction of time, because the direction of time is primitive and is before that. I don't know if I was clear about this point.
So you'd be happy adding in a boundary condition. You would just say it's like just an accident of our universe that it's at the beginning, right?
I mean, I'm happy with adding a boundary condition if you want to explain the thermodynamic part of time. Yeah, it could be a good solution. But if you want to explain, or if you want to say something about the direction of time, I mean, in this primitive way, you don't need a boundary condition. It's just primitive. So, but then if we are now discussing about thermodynamics, I would say, yeah, probably it's a good explanation for thermodynamics. I don't know, we can discuss it.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's a different kind of. Yeah, I am disconnecting these two debates in some way.
Thank you for interesting thought. I want to challenge, I guess, the argument that somehow we have to decide whether to put the symmetries in the description or if there are something to be found in nature. I acknowledge that we can divide, let's say, let's take a Humean position, for instance, and let's divide the Humean mosaic and account on it on the contingent facts and the laws, right? And we may have different schemes for doing that. But if you choose that, it is a fact about nature whether when you choose the best division, the most economical, the most parsimonious division, and you can isolate the laws, those laws are symmetric, contain some symmetries or not, and this pertains to not necessarily time reversal invariant, but so it is a fact of nature. It's a fact about nature whether the best description that we can obtain is susceptible to a symmetric characterization or not. So it's not just our.
Yeah, that's good point, and I also have issues about what I really think about symmetry in that way. Let's take one of the view. I mean, humans are different. It depends on the human that you are talking to, but some humans think that, well, the laws are supervening on the human mosaic, they play some epistemic role. It's fine, but they are also regularities, so they are not just unreal. They are very real because they are in their regularities, right? They are identical regularities. Plus some epistemic constraints. That's fine. And the symmetries is just, you could think of them as second order generalizations, but they also supervene on the QMSA. So at some point they also should be real. I mean, they should be somehow picking the regularities in the right way. So they are not absolutely incremental or anti-real, right? Yeah, it's true. Now, my question is, how do you usually find these symmetries? You need some process of idealization, some process of, okay, not taking into account some interactions. You're doing some also restricting the domain in which
those are approximate symmetries. You're talking about approximate.
Okay.
Then but the symmetries that we believe that are absolute symmetries, we don't find them by doing any approximation.
But you need at some point some idealization. I mean,
Well, you need to separate the you need this separation between laws and contingent facts. And the symmetries are questions about the laws, not about the contingent facts.
Yeah, but this part of the law has this dual nature. Yes, some point is true. I mean, you're right. I mean, it's something that also I was thinking of. They should be somehow real, but they also have some epistemic normative components because you need to work really hard to find the symmetries. It's not that you see the symmetries out there. It's like, okay, I need to formulate this theory in some specific way. I need to idealize some conditions to not take into account some interactions, blah, 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 blah. And then, okay, you see the symmetries. Also, in some cases, you impose the symmetries before having the dynamics. Say, okay, I have a dynamics with some symmetries. I need that theory.
You impose the symmetries because you see them, you have reasons, you have empirical reasons to impose the symmetries on your theory construction.
But
you don't impose the symmetries because you are dominated.
No, yeah, not. But what do you mean by empirical in this case? I mean, you need you want good empirical theory. It's okay, but
and you see certain patterns, and then you want to describe them.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that you only see the pattern. I mean, you are finding the pattern in some specific, following some specific processes in which you have to idealize something. It's not that you write down your theory and say, okay, I have these symmetries. Wow, I discovered them. So okay, previously you have thinking of much more idealized cases, and you write down the equation in some way because you want to reflect this equation. So I mean, it's not so clear to me which is the direction of the explanation in this case. But again, I agree with you, and also it's a problem for me in this case that you cannot be, even in this human framework, completely anti-realist about the symmetries because they are something that they are getting right. Because at the end, they supervene on their regularities. So it's not just they are purely epistemic constraint, they are doing something else. Yeah, but, I mean, this is, we can probably discuss this after, but
thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. I think the first thing I would say is I really like the overarching project kind of questioning the relevance of time reversal invariance when putting forward a theory with the primitive direction of time. If only because, if you believe that time marches forwards in a particular direction, you don't really have to be committed to what would happen if time started marching backwards. Like, time doesn't march backwards. It's just, that could do anything. So I like that project. What I want to push on, I suppose, is the particular theory of temporal and spatial relations that you kind of put forward as an option there. Because that theory seems very similar to causal set theory. So causal set theory, you also have a whole bunch of events, and those events are connected by primitive relations, and those relations are directed. It's just that the relations aren't temporal or spatial per se, they're just causal. So you just have a whole series of primitively directed causal relations connecting events. And so I guess I was wondering why, I don't know how much you've engaged with causal set theory and the comparison between this and that, but I guess the question is, why is it spatial and temporal relations specifically, and you have both of those, rather than, I guess, just a web of directed causal relations, because that can also give rise to the direction of time.
Yeah, I'm not familiarized with causal set theory, but in that case, probably we are going to have a discussion about what you mean by causal in this case. because I would explain again as the direction of time, as we're saying, is primitive. It's because you explain causality from direction of time. So in that case, I'm gonna ask you how you can have something like causality without having a directionality of time. Probably there's a way. I don't know.
Yeah, it's probably just a naming convention, to be honest. I think the relations that causal set theorists put forward are quite similar to the kind of relations you're putting forward. So I would say just look at causal set theory, because that could be the theory you're looking for. Like
Okay, probably then it's a semantic debate, in the sense that we are calling the same thing from different names. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to look into that, because I'm not familiarized with causal theory, but yeah, could be an option. Yeah, thanks for the suggestion.
So I've got the thing that there are two like distinct ideas which are being like run together in the talk, and I think to an extent in the discussion, which is, so one thing is like asymmetry, which is just that end is different to that end. That's it, you know, like that's asymmetric.
Yeah.
But then the other notion is like direction, which is much more kind of metaphysically loaded.
Yeah.
Now to explain the asymmetries, you know, I would agree with you that it seems what we need is just a boundary condition, and then you've got your laws, which I know, notwithstanding some of the other weird ones, I call them that as probably some people's life work. Like most time symmetric. Let's go Newtonian.
Yeah.
Time symmetric laws, and yeah, you've got a uniform distribution according to the Lugano measure, low entropy macro state. And I don't want to say press play because that implies direction, but just when you have that, it's you get the other, and there's this big program of like trying to get the record asymmetry and the causal asymmetry and other kind of stuff. But I mean, what does the notion of like if that's what we're trying to explain? So there's no notion of directionality, just brute asymmetry. Is that what you're trying to explain? Because I'm not sure what your primitive notion of directionality achieves in that capacity. Is that what you're trying to explain? Because it seems like I mean, without building in the notion of forwards is the higher entropy end. Do you know what I mean? It would seem like you would need to kind of build that into your notion of directionality, that the forwards time direction is the higher entropy end. But then it's like you're kind of putting in what you want to get out.
Okay, yeah, I get the point. Probably what I'm thinking of is something more basic and simple-minded. When you are giving these explanations about entropy, and I can buy entirely the story about want to explain the entropy increases, and then all this problem with reversal, and then you need boundary conditions, and then you play this asymmetry. But I am concerned about, for instance, what do you mean by increasing that section? It seems to have already a direction. So you need to give me a temporal idea about what you mean by increasing or decreasing, but it's a opposite direction.
Yeah.
And now, so I mean, to make sense of that discourse, if you want, my intuition that you need something more fundamental, and this is time, or the direction of time, because you want to make sense of these temporally biased concepts like increase. And then to say, okay, this is one way in which you can explain this. But now what I also passed me is that when you say that you can explain the direction of time or the asymmetry of time in terms of entropy, you have other much more fundamental asymmetries that cannot be explained by entropy increasing behavior, like weak interaction, dedicated weak interactions. We don't have I mean, as far as I know probably someone else knows it, but we don't have you have an asymmetry in quantum field theory with weak interactions, but now we don't have a thermodynamic explanation that explains this temporal asymmetry. So it seems to be that, yeah, this could work at some level, but it doesn't work in lower levels. But as I said before, I am more concerned about how to make sense of this explanation about asymmetries in time without presupposing that increases is already a temporal concept.
Can I do a follow-up? Okay. Yeah, I think when most physicists talk about increase, it's a kind of ersatz increase. What they mean is they don't they use the word, but they don't really mean it. I think it's
Okay,
like increasing relative to our mistaken sense of time's passage.
okay.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just for the last question. Very quick. Please.
Okay, symmetry and asymmetry aside, I was wondering what other formal properties we envision in this relation to have. The transitive also, or
You mean,
does everything have to be
yeah, in this case,
indirectly connected to something?
what I mean by this? These properties, you mean?
The primitive relation that we're positive.
Yeah.
It's a transitive.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I don't know what you mean by that. You said yes. I mean, in which sense it's transitive.
If A is A bears this relation to B, and B bears it to C.
Yeah.
A bear also to
Yeah.
C.
Yeah.
Okay, that's assumed to be correct.
Yeah, I assume to be correct. Yeah.
Is there any notion of how to measure temporal distance? You measure it by, I mean, naively we have this idea that things can be more or less apart.
Yeah.
So how do you cover that?
Yeah, but I mean, I think that that depends not on the metaphysics you have. It depends on your theory of measurements. Depends. Yeah, I think that you're gonna find a way to measure. I mean, what you need in your metaphysics to have, which is the basic relation to make sense of other things. And this is the temporal relation, the spatial relation. Now you say, okay, I need to measure them. Okay, then you need, it's not metaphysics anymore, it's any physical theory about measurements, and then there are some physics here that say something. But what I want to recover is the idea that not measurement by itself, but to make sense of the temporal notion that you are using when measuring something like temporal relation. This is what I want to. Then how you implement that? Okay, this is a different story. It doesn't depend on. I wouldn't dare to say how to do that from pure metaphysical view. Yeah.
Okay.
We can take that one. Yeah.
Sorry for that. Goodbye.
Yeah. Okay.